China says it wants to cooperate with Myanmar to restore stability in a border region. This after a group of ethnic rebels in this region of Shan state united to defeat the military stationed here. The region is important to Beijing due to trade links with Myanmar and because it's part of the global Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative. Ethnic rebels that have for years fought the military single-handedly have now banded together to pose a new challenge to the junta's rule.
Attacks allegedly targeting the junta and its allies in Myanmar's Shan state. 3 rebel groups, known as the Three Brotherhood Alliance, seized several military posts and key roads linking Myanmar with China in these attacks. This video released by one of the rebel groups allegedly shows its fighters occupying the town of Chin Choi Ho. Its fighters took control of the junta's vehicles and ammunition. Myanmar's military admitted it had lost control of the border town.
Up to now, some parts of the areas have been abandoned by administrative bodies of the government and security organizations. These are Chin Choi Ho and 2 other townships.
The clashes between the military and tribal groups had been escalating since last week in Myanmar's northern Shan state. The state bordering China is considered strategically important for Myanmar. Here, a $1 billion rail link is planned as part of Beijing's Belt and Road Global Infrastructure Project. Last week, China's public security minister met the junta leaders during his visit to Myanmar. A major chunk of Myanmar's border trade with China passes through Chin Choi Ho. The leaders discussed ways to establish peace along their shared border. China is a close partner and major arms supplier of the military government. It has refused to call the junta's 2021 power grab a coup. The unrest at the border has prompted Chinese authorities to ask all parties for a ceasefire.
China is paying close attention to the conflict in northern Myanmar and urges all parties to immediately cease fire and persist in resolving differences through peaceful means, avoid escalation of the situation and take practical measures to ensure the security of the China-Myanmar border.
Fighting between the junta and ethnic armed groups, including the Three Brotherhood Alliance, intensified after military leader General Min Aung Hlaing seized power in February 2021. The coup sparked widespread protests against the military government, which then launched a brutal crackdown on protesters and dissent. The military has been in a long fight with ethnic groups, airstriking and shelling their strongholds in remote areas. Human rights groups say thousands have been killed in these attacks. Rebel groups have long operated in peripheral regions inhabited by ethnic minorities. And with this recent victory in Shan state, their position in the conflict appears to have improved.
And joining me for more is Deputy Asia Director of Human Rights Watch, Phil Robertson. Phil, ethnic rebels uniting against the military in Shan state. What has prompted this, and is this an exception or a pattern we are seeing across the country?
Well, it's certainly something new with the Northern Alliance working together in this way. And it is a major push which has also gotten the support of the various People's Defense Forces and other groups. But it's not all the groups. I mean, for instance, the United Wa State Army is still remaining its neutral stance, and other groups have not fully joined in. What I would say is that this is something that is unprecedented since the February 2021 coup, where we have now seen in the north this alliance of groups finally coming up to step up for the Spring Revolution. And we'll see if it's sustained or not. But I mean, certainly a lot of military bases have been captured. A lot of weapons have been seized. There's many hundreds of Burmese military soldiers who have been captured as well. So it's certainly a big movement for the situation in Myanmar.
What does it mean for the country's pro-democracy movement?
Well, what it means is the further weakening of the military junta. where their ability to control the far-flung parts of Myanmar is now coming into greater question. The fact that they've lost the control of the major road from the Chinese border to Mandalay is certainly something that no one expected. I think it shows that there's a greater degree of advantage now on the side of the ethnic and rebel forces against this entrenched military junta.
And speaking of China, China appears to be directly affected due to the regional trade and upcoming infrastructure projects part of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's appealed for calm. How do you think Myanmar authorities will respond?
Well, I think that the Myanmar authorities recognize, in fact, that they had an opportunity to do some of the things that China wanted them to do, particularly going after some of these scam centers that have been operating in ethnic enclaves under the control of the military. These are the various different scam centers that have been ripping people off in China and other parts around the world and been hosting thousands of trafficked persons. And part of the subtext of this is that there's a crackdown by China against these scam centers that are operating in the border regions of neighboring states. And the SAC, military junta, didn't want to do anything about it. And the ethnic group said they did. And so I think that it's very clear that something like this had to have a green light from the Chinese government to go forward. There's no way that they would allow this kind of unrest on their border without having given some sort of prior assent to allow the ethnic groups to launch this major offensive.
Conversely, what does that say about the influence that China has on the Myanmar junta, or essentially happenings in Myanmar? Essentially, my question is, can China intervene and actually work on the side of pro-democracy protesters and unseat the junta?
Well, we're not seeing China getting to that point yet. It's entirely possible that at some point, if it decided that its interests lay with the ethnic and democratic groups over the military junta, that they could change sides. But right now, they're still hedging their bets. For China, everything in Myanmar is about what's good for China. And I think in this case, they decided they needed to send a signal to the Burmese military junta that their stubbornness, intransigence was not going to be rewarded, that these scam centers had to be done in, and ultimately that these areas on the China border had to be sort of brought back to some sort of degree of accountability. We'll see if that actually plays out the way that the Chinese wanted, but it's quite clear that China is in Myanmar for its own interests, not necessarily for the interests of the Myanmar people.
Speaking of the interests of the Myanmar people, the U.S. imposed sanctions on financial services rendered to Myanmar's state oil company. That happened last week, but there have been other sanctions that have been put in place since 2021. In the interests of the Myanmar people, are they having any impact on the junta?
Well, it's quite clear that they will have impact. This is a sanction that we've called on the U.S. and others to make for quite some time, going after the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. This is the real cash cow that has been feeding the Myanmar military junta's coffers. And it's about time that the U.S. finally did this. The Europeans did it more than a year ago, and we called for the U.S. to follow suit at that time, but they did not. I think ultimately this will have impact. It's going to create significant difficulties for the military junta. It's going to make it harder for them to raise the kind of funds they need to continue this war effort against the Burmese people.
We'll leave it there for the time being. Thanks so much for joining us today. Phil Robertson from Human Rights Watch. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Besides these general and specific sometimes sanctions, it isn't just in Shan State that the military is facing a challenge. Just below Shan State lies Kaya State in the east of the country. Formerly known as Karenni State, it too is a hotbed of resistance against the military. Ethnic minority groups here are leading the fight for democracy against the junta. But the junta is increasingly using airstrikes to hit back. Here's a report from DW in cooperation with the Democratic Voice of Burma.
The actual attack plane, we call the jet fighter, its songs is really bad. I can think of any words.
People in Kaya State, formerly known as the Karenni or Red Karen State, have been fighting for more autonomy from the central government for over half a century. Since the 2021 coup, the military's crackdown on dissent has led to more intense fighting.
That wind blown sound is, we all know that sound actually. If you had that sound, there will be an air attack near X.
More than 500 civilians have been killed, and there are fears the airstrikes are targeting non-combatants.
The Myanmar military has always had a doctrine of counterinsurgency that deliberately targets civilians. This is known as the four cuts approach. The Myanmar Air Force has capabilities now that it didn't have a decade ago to target the ground with precision at night and with powerful munitions.
Karenni State had a population of nearly 400,000 people prior to the coup. Since then, 200,000 people have fled their homes because of the fighting. They've become internally displaced or refugees in neighbouring Thailand.
The aim is to undermine the civilian support base of insurgencies by targeting the civilian population. You know, if the local population doesn't have food, they can't provide food to the insurgents. If the local population is displaced out of the area, they can't provide recruits to the insurgents or intelligence on army operations.